Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Nekusar the Mindraiser. So Nekusar is a Grixis commander, 5 mana 2/4, and it says, at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card, and whenever an opponent draws a card, Nekusar deals 1 damage to that player. So obviously the best avenue to take this commander is going to be forcing our opponents to draw cards and then damaging them as a result, or punishing them in some other way. So, along with the usual categories, we've got anti-wheels, we've got our card draw, of course, we've got our combo pieces, our counter spells, our fast mana, our lands, of course, protection, ramp, removal, stacks pieces, sweepers, tutors, and then regular wheels. So, to go over the broader categories to start with, we've got our card draw, which does include all of the wheels. So to skip past the wheels for now, there's Bolas' Citadel, Lorien Revealed, Mystic Remora, Rhystic Study. Then in the combos, we've got Underworld Breach, LED, Thoracle Consult. Pretty stock standard stuff we got going on here. Although there is no actual Brain Freeze payoff, but we can combine Breach with LED and wheels, like Wheel of Fortune, to eventually just go through our whole deck and hit Oracle. Pretty stock counter spells. Fast mana, we do want to get Nekusar into play really quickly. We also have a lot of expensive stuff, and the general rule is that the more wheels you have, the better that fast mana becomes, because you can just expend all of your fast mana really quickly and then wheel to draw a new hand. Fairly stock Grixis mana base, with the only really standout addition being Gaia Reach Sanitarium, which I'll discuss later. Cavern of Souls, so Nekusar doesn't get countered. Pretty stock ramp spells. Few pieces of removal. And then our stacks cards, which are going to combine with our wheel effects. But aside from those, we've got Opposition Agent to prevent searching. And then, of course, if we're causing our opponents to draw and discard a whole bunch of cards, Dothy Voidwalker is going to be useful for either stealing something that's really good that we can cast for free with it, or just keeping our opponents from being able to fill up their graveyards and get their own breach lines going. We've got Cyclonic Rift and Fire Covenant as our sweepers, then a few tutors, including Tainted Pact, of course, because it goes with Thassa's Oracle. So then, what are we doing with the wheels? So obviously wheels are good with Nekusar, because if Nekusar is in play, then anytime our opponent is drawing cards, they're taking damage. So what kind of wheels do we got going on here? So wheels are typically used to refer to Wheel of Fortune and its type of cards, the draw 7 discard or draw 7 shuffle your hand back in effect. Here I mean more broadly as just a lot of these cards are doing that, or just doing something very similar to that. So we've got Burning Inquiry. Each player draws 3 and then discards 3 at random. So obviously good for just triggering a bunch of draw triggers from cards like Orcish Bowmasters and whatnot, and Nekusar. It is obviously card negative because we are expending a card to cast Burning Inquiry, and then we're just breaking even on draws and discards. It does have the potential of maybe screwing up what our opponents are trying to do if it forces them to randomly discard important cards that they were going to play, although it also has the ability to have the opposite effect of allowing them to draw into cards that they really needed. But in general, this is going to be one of the weaker effects in the deck, but the main selling point here is that it's only 1 mana. So next we've got Dark Deal, and this, like Burning Inquiry, is a card negative card. So it's each player discards all the cards in their hand, then draws that many cards -1. So it's basically a windfall type effect, but you get 1 less card. Then we've got Echo of Eons. So Echo of Eons is obviously better when you do it from the graveyard for its flashback cost. So we do need usually a way to get it into the graveyard, although along with a bunch of our other wheels, we have plenty of ways of doing that. Or we can just straight up cast it for 6 and then cast it again later for 3. Then this card in particular is pretty interesting, Forced Fruition. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player draws 7 cards. So notably, this doesn't apply to us, it's only the opponents. And it is very risky because it does have the potential to backfire on us by allowing our opponents to just cast a couple of cheap spells and then fill up their hand with combo pieces and whatnot. But if they cannot assemble a quick combo, then this will eventually force them to just draw through their whole deck and lose. So there are certain combos that require very few cards. Combos like Thassa's Oracle plus Demonic Consultation. And those combos are fairly easy to assemble, and so a card like Forced Fruition is really bad against them. But then there's other cards that are like Underworld Breach or are more Storm-esque, where this completely kills the combo because they just wind up drawing too many cards and eventually deck out. Then we've got Memory Jar, which is, again, just another wheel. Molten Psyche is each player shuffles the cards from their hand back into their library and then draws that many cards. And if you control 3 or more artifacts, it deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of cards that player has drawn this turn. So notably, this can be used after you wheel multiple times with other spells to be a huge damage payoff. Then we've got Reforge the Soul, which is just Wheel of Fortune for 5, but it has Miracle for 2. Teferi's Puzzle Box is 4 mana, and at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player puts the cards in their hand on the bottom of their library and then draws that many cards. So it basically wheels every single upkeep, or every single draw step rather, for that player. Time Reversal. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library and then draws 7, exile Time Reversal. A bit expensive at 5 mana, but same kind of effect that we're looking for. Then there's Time Spiral, which is basically the same thing except we get to untap 6 lands, and that's what's going to make Time Spiral one of the better of the expensive cards because we get to recoup the cost to cast it. Then of course Time Twister, same deal but only 3 mana. Wheel and Deal is any number of target opponents each discard their hand, then draw 7, and then we draw a card. So it's less useful in that we are not getting to wheel along with everyone else, but it is still a wheel effect in case we have any sort of draw triggers like Nekusar going. Of course, the old Wheel of Fortune standby. Whispering Madness, each player discards their hand and then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. It also has Cipher, which basically means we can exile it into a creature, and then when that creature hits the opponent, we get to cast it again for free. Although that's usually not going to happen. This is usually just going to be 4 mana for wheel. Then Windfall over here, another old staple of EDH. Each player, same effect as Whispering Madness. And then finally, Winds of Change. All players shuffle their hands to their libraries and then draw the same number of cards they originally held. So again, this isn't as good because we can't ensure that players that have low amounts of cards in their hand will draw more cards. But it is like Burning Inquiry, only a single mana, so that makes it fairly decent. Now, of course, we cannot rely on just having Nekusar in play. First of all, Nekusar might die, he might get countered, or it just might not be enough. Like, Nekusar does deal 1 damage per card drawn, but that just might not be good enough, especially when we're giving our opponents all of these extra cards. So another way to take it is to fill up on additional effects that are like Nekusar to increase the amount of damage, or take an alternative, more stacksy route and use that to make the wheels break parity. So this leads us to the anti-wheels. So we've got cards that are like Nekusar in Fate Unraveler. Whenever an opponent draws a card, Fate Unraveler deals 1 damage to that player. There's also Underworld Dreams, which is a triple black 3 mana enchantment that does the same thing. I tend not to like that one as much because triple black can kind of be hard on curve, but you could play that either in addition or instead of this. Then we've got Orcish Bowmasters, which will trigger once per additional card drawn to ping and create a bigger token. Shieldred, of course, also does the same thing. Opponents are going to take 2 damage per extra card drawn. And then we've got Narset, where our opponents straight up cannot draw additional cards. So this winds up being a way to punish them and break the parity so that our wheels are drawing us cards, but the wheels are not drawing them extra cards, or just 1 extra card. Same thing with Notion Thief. Instead of them drawing extra cards, we draw those cards. And then finally, although not all of the wheels cause discarding, a fair number of them do, which means that Waste Not and Turgid can be helpful. So Waste Not, whenever an opponent discards a creature, you make a 2/2 zombie. If they discard a land, you make double black mana. And if they discard a non-creature, non-land, you draw a card. And in Turgrid's case, whenever an opponent sacks a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you get to put the card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Now, notably, with the cards like Narset and Notion Thief that shut off extra card draws, we can win the game with certain stacks-based combos. So in particular, if we can get our opponents Hellbent, we can use Gaia Reach Sanitarium in combination with Narset so that they can't draw extra cards anymore. Although that only applies to 1 opponent. With multiple players, we can't do it multiple times. But the bigger one is with Teferi's Puzzle Box. So because Teferi's Puzzle Box triggers on each upkeep, if we have a Narset or a Notion Thief in play, it means that they will draw for their turn normally, then they'll put that card and any other cards they may have in their hand back on the bottom, and then when they try to draw a new hand from the puzzle box, they can't. So when you have Narset or Notion Thief or any equivalent card like that that shuts off extra card draws, if you also have a Teferi's puzzle box in play, it means that they basically can't have any cards in their hand for the rest of the game. They only get the one initial draw they have for the first card drawn for turn, and unless that card is an instant speed spell that they can immediately cast to try to remove puzzle box or one of the stacks cards, they basically are out of cards for the rest of the game. So that is basically Nekusar. So we're trying again to get a bunch of fast mana and ramp out so that we can start wheeling and then either win via Nekusar or some other punishing effect like Shieldred, like Bowmasters, like Narset to combine our wheels with, or we can just straight up win with our traditional combos like Thoracle and Demonic Consultation. And that is Nekusar in EDH. So Xyris is a Teamer commander, 5 mana, 3/5 flyer, and it says whenever an opponent draws a card, except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, you create a 1/1 snake token. And whenever Xyris, the Writhing Storm, deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each draw that many cards. So like a commander like Nekusar, for example, this is a card that benefits from your opponent's drawing cards, but specifically, rather than punishing them by dealing them damage or staxing them, you are creating snake tokens. So you can either create those snake tokens off of playing effects like wheels to make everyone draw cards and then put a ton of snakes into play, or you can just straight up hit one player and have you and them draw extra cards and then make a bunch of snakes. So the various card draw in the deck, we've got Consecrated Sphinx. If we're going to make our opponents draw extra cards anyway, why not draw even more cards for ourselves? And then we've got creatures like Toski, Edric, and Curiosity Crafter, which whenever we hit our opponents with any creature, or specifically creature tokens, in the case of Curiosity Crafter, we draw a card for each creature hitting them, which pairs very well with our various snake tokens that we're making off of Xyris. Then we've got Jessica's Will. We've got a bunch of wheel effects like Memory Jar, Molten Psyche, Reforge the Soul, Time Spiral, Time Twister, Wheel of Fortune, Wheel of Misfortune, Windfall, and Winds of Change, all of which can cause mass card draw from our opponents and us, and thus generate a ton of snake tokens. Of course, Skull Clamp is good in any deck that's spitting out random 1/1 tokens. And Molten Psyche can act as a secondary win condition since it does damage equal to the amount of cards players drew. And then the typical Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora, of course. Then we've got our combo cards. I'll come back to this later. We've got some counter spells. We've got a bunch of fast mana because we want to get Xyris down as fast as possible. And we want to, of course, cast a bunch of wheels. And fast mana and wheels go together like peanut butter and jelly. We've got haste because, again, we want both Xyris to have haste so we can immediately attack someone, or we want to be able to wheel, generate a bunch of snake tokens, and then have those snake tokens attack. So we've got Concordant Crossroads and Mass Hysteria, Lightning Greaves to protect Xyris and let it specifically attack, and then Roar of Resistance. 2 mana creature tokens you control have haste, and whenever one or more creatures attack, you may pay 1 and a red. If you do, creatures attacking your opponents and or planeswalkers they control get +2/+0 until end of turn. So it's both a way to haste your tokens and pump them. Then we've got various Teamer lands. The standout one, of course, being Gaia's Cradle, which pairs great with all of these random snake tokens that we're making. Some additional protection in Deflecting, Swat, Spellskite, Veil of Summer. We've got a bunch of ramp cards, including a bunch of Monodorks. Fairly self-explanatory. A little bit of the Red Blasts for removal. We've got Winter Orb as a stacks piece. Doesn't matter too much. We want to go slow and we want to ramp. Also notable, we've got Cryptolith right over here, which allows our creatures to tap for any mana, so it means that our snake tokens become mana dorks. Cyclonic Rift, and we've got only 2 tutors. Crop Rotation, primarily this is just to grab Gaia's Cradle, and Mystical Tutor for wheels or various other things. And then we've got this section right here. This is just all the wheels in the deck separated from card draw specifically. So then if we come up here and we look at the combos, we of course have token doublers in Parallel Lives and Adrix and Nev twin casters. So if you'd make tokens, you make double those amount of tokens. Obviously good with Xyris making snake tokens. We've got Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar, which we can use to sack our tokens to generate mana. Mana Echoes, which generates colorless every time we have a creature enter equal to the amount of creatures that share a type with it, which is obviously great in a deck that's spewing out a bunch of snake tokens. And then we've got Impact Tremors, which deals 1 damage to each opponent every time we make a snake token, so this alone can kill our opponent as well. We also got Shared Animosity. Whenever creature you control attacks, it gets +1/0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a type with it. Again, obviously great with the snake tokens. We also do have Underworld Breach and Brain Freeze. Notably, we do not have LED. but we can generate tons of mana using Ashnod's and Phyrexian Altar anyway, or Mana Echoes. And then lastly, we've got Breath of Fury, which is an aura that enchants our creature, and it says, whenever the enchanted creature deals combat damage to a player, sack it and attach Breath of Fury to a creature you control. If you do, untap all creatures you control, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase. So we can just sack a token, take an extra combat, move this to a new token, sack the token, take an extra combat, move it to a new token. Depending on how many tokens we start with, or if we can make more tokens during combat, we can win the game just off of the Breath of Fury. And similarly, we've got Opposition. So this is tap an untapped creature you control to tap target artifact, creature, or land. So once we generate enough tokens, we can start using Opposition to tap down our opponent's lands, Mana Dorks, and Mana Rocks, thus making this basically a stacks piece that takes them out of the game. So one way that will straight up combo our opponent is if we've got Xyris, Breath of Fury, and then anything that grants haste, because we can attack with Xyris and make more snake tokens, and then the new snake tokens can continue to attack. There are other combos that we could include with Xyris, but I think they're generally not that great. So I think this is mainly what you want to be doing. So either just straight up combo kill them with Breath of Fury, or just deal enough damage to them with Shared Animosity, or Roar of Resistance, or Impact Tremors, or just make a bunch of mana and extra tokens with these guys, or stacks them out with Opposition, or combo kill them with Underworld Breach plus something else, or just specifically Brain Freeze. Or you can breach in like Wheels, because you can wheel, and then if you've got one of these altars in play, Xyris makes a bunch of snake tokens, and then you just sack all these snake tokens, Brain Freeze to get more escape fodder, and go off that way. So again, just to recap, Xyris, we want Xyris in play as fast as possible. We then want to cast draw spells, specifically Wheels and things that make our opponents draw. Or if we are afraid of our opponents drawing, we can just hit one of our opponents with Xyris to generate the snake tokens, and then eventually find one of these combos to win the game by either putting a bunch of snake tokens into play and attacking with them with haste, or with pumping them, or with impact tremors, or finding a secondary combo like Underworld Breach plus Brain Freeze, or Breath of Fury to take infinite combat, or Opposition to keep all their stuff tapped down. And yep, that is basically Xyris the Writhing Storm.